A very good afternoon to you all, and thanks for enduring the heat and making it here. I'm Harry Tzimitras, and I run the Turkish Greek Study Center at Bilgi University, and the graduate program on international relations with a concentration on Turkish Greek studies. Originally, I wanted to say that things are going to be talked about today in the light of recent developments, but I had not in mind that recent developments would have included the Greek elections of the other day. So I'm not sure if I can scrap the whole thing of what I was going to say, but hopefully I won't have to. Essentially, I was going to present a rather positive outlook as to where things go with regard to bilateral issues between the two countries in the Aegean, and including the necessary third, Cyprus. But I'm not sure how things will go with the new government. Actually, I'm not sure if we will have a government. Even if there will be one, chances are that with the Conservative Party in power as the majority, we might suffer a drawback in issues pertaining to international relations of Greece in the area. Not least because the positions held by the party and in particular the possible incumbent for the position of Prime Minister have been much more inflexible than counterparts in the past. Possibly things are not going to be going as wrong as they will probably go in the case of Macedonia / Fyrom / Skopje / whatever. But still, I think there is a bleak possibility of rapprochement. So perhaps rapprochement will become rapprochement. But we'll see how things go. Then today, what I wanted to do is talk about one of the many bilateral issues, namely the Aegean disputes, and see it within the framework of the last 10 or 15 years of rapprochement, and further connected with developments, more recent developments, especially since 2009, 2010, regarding oil and gas potential exploration and exploitation in the Eastern Mediterranean. My hope is to draw the conclusion after that the spirit of rapprochement will not die very soon, and also the fact that this economic crisis, as we know it today, might be an opportunity and not only a challenge for the countries to engage perhaps in much needed exploration and exploitation of natural resources. By way of very brief background information, most people in Greece and perhaps in Turkey would have thought that the Aegean disputes have been with the people all along. This is certainly not the case. The disputes rose in the 1970s, early 1970s, as an outcome of a number of factors, from the 1973 oil crisis, where states went berserk to find oil at the time, not that much natural gas, antagonism of great powers within the Cold War framework, and a very peculiar understanding, if you like, of the role of Greece, not in itself, but perhaps as a puppet of the West in the minds of the so-called center-left governments in Turkey. So effectively, the disputes have never been with us all along, and therefore they can potentially be also resolved. However, since the outbreak of the bilateral issues in the early 1970s and until today, so literally for 40 years, they have been very much alive, and sometimes peaking, depending on international and regional developments, sometimes, as the case has been within the last 10 or so years, following a rather flat line of existence. In principle, to sum things up, Greece has been arguing all along that the only bilateral dispute discernible in the Aegean pertains to the continental shelf, and this being a legal dispute is amenable only to a judicial solution. This has been a rather inflexible position of the Greek state, and the successive governments, 100% of the governments since 1974 at least, after the restoration of democracy, whereas the traditional Turkish position, although it fluctuated throughout these decades, was in principle that the disputes are of a political nature and thus should be amenable to a political solution. And of course that there is a multitude of disputes pertaining to, yes, the continental shelf, but also the breadth of the territorial sea, airspace, FIA regions, and this and that. So effectively we had two diametrically opposed views of the two states, which were characterized by two features: one, maximalism, and B, inflexibility. As if this has not been enough, in the recent past, there's a discussion pertaining to the possibility of establishing exclusive economic zones as well. And this has been, to a large extent, the outcome of developments in the southeastern Mediterranean, including certainly the Cyprus agreements, and by that I mean the Republic of Cyprus or South Cyprus, with certain other littoral states in the region like Egypt, Lebanon, and Israel. So effectively, the continental shelf question was one that formed the basis of the possible rapprochement that we've been living since 1999 in the Helsinki process. But this has, I think, been aggravated through the recent discussion. So allow me, if I may, to start with clearing out the terrain between these two poles of the discussion: exclusive economic zone or continental shelf. What is it in the interest of the states to establish, what not, and how can things go sweet or sour after that? Whatever the stance, exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, this and that, we need to bear in mind, first and foremost, that this is not an independent issue. It's an issue that forms part of the wider framework of bilateral disputes, and it's not only the various interconnected issues at play, but also a wider geographical area that includes not anymore just the Aegean, but the whole Eastern Mediterranean basin. The turning point of the discussion, we always say, is the 1999 Helsinki process. In my mind, it's not very clear that the 1999 Helsinki process brought about rapprochement itself. I think it would have been rather mistaken to say that. What 99 did, and I refresh your memory, 99 marks the turning point because of the unfortunate earthquakes in both states, plus the Helsinki summit of the European Council, locking the Republic of Cyprus as a member state and Turkey as a candidate state, was that it allowed political elites on both sides to claim legitimacy for policies that had been in place after the end of the Cold War, so effectively for a decade before. So it is not, I think, right to say that the earthquakes as such, with the immense camaraderie feeling they introduced, brought about rapprochement. What I think happened was that they acted as a catalyst for the political elites in both sides to claim legitimacy for those policies. So effectively, in the last 10 or 12 years, we haven't really made any concrete steps ahead, or very few in the beginning, but at least we didn't take steps back in the way that we did before that. The last hot crisis, if you like, goes back to 1996 or so. So rapprochement has, if nothing else, at least reached a plateau at the moment, whereby a new political will needs to be in place and a new step forward to be taken by the leaderships in both countries to take things further. But at least, as I say, we didn't really take any steps back. I'm afraid that steps back will be taken if the discussion on the exclusive economic zone moves ahead. In principle, in Greece, one of the characteristics that I think has been in place, certainly since 1974, on the part of successive governments, but also at the wider public level, is that Turkey is a revisionist state, Greece is a rather vulnerable state, and thus Greece has always selected international law as a perceived tool of that would allow it to not to suffer in the hands of a mighty rival. Unfortunately, Greece has been using international law, as certainly Turkey has done in the past, in a very utilitarian way. So effectively, the public feeling in Greece, and certainly the elite's feeling, is that Greece is not wishing for anything but the status quo. It's just, of course, that the status quo is very much in favor of Greece as things stand. So within this framework, Turkey is poised to be a revisionist state, wishing to alter this status quo, and thus a troublemaker in the region. Turkey, on the other hand, in particular in the past, throughout 70s, 80s, and perhaps 1990s, at least until the collapse of the Cold War system, prioritized always political solutions to the disputes, mainly based on the fact that it perceived itself to be in a better negotiating position, politically and strategically speaking, rather than just sticking with principles of international law. So effectively, the notion is that in the Greek public, at least, that Greece monopolizes legality in the region. Now, irrespective of the fact that this might be a political position, if you like, in the eyes of leaderships, at the public sphere, it makes it very difficult to introduce any alternative discourse because of the extremely well-established perceptions along these lines in the Greek public. So successive governments since the 1970s have convinced the Greek people that there's only one dispute, the continental shelf, that this dispute is a legal one, and thus it needs to be legally solved through possible recourse to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and third and more importantly, that a possible recourse to the International Court of Justice would be a walk in the park for Greece. And this is certainly not the case. So effectively, even if governments nowadays would realize the difficulty of the task, they would have a very hard time convincing the public that what they had been pushing for all along, recourse to an international adjudicative mechanism, didn't turn out to be exactly what it was. And this makes it very hard for the governments to decide to take things a step further, because of the fear that they're going to lose legitimacy in their discourse. And this has certainly been the case in 2004. What I mean to say is that, by way of refreshing your memory, in the 1999 Helsinki summit, one of the stipulations was that Turkey and Greece would work together in solving the bilateral disputes by the end of 2003, and if no solution could be found by the end of 2003, then the states would refer the dispute to the International Court of Justice at The Hague. This, in a sense, was, at least for Greece, or the perception of Greece, a huge diplomatic victory over the years, because effectively it managed to lock, if you like, Turkey into an obligation for which Greece had been fighting for 30 years. Now, although technically speaking, no legal obligation emanates from it, at least it was a concrete step, if you like, in the way of solving disputes in the way that Greece wished to since 1973.